Listen. Do you recognize this sound? Now speaking of sounds, let us be precise and give you some sound advice.
Hi, I'm Mike Sokol from Live Sound Co. and welcome to the Live Sound Advice column series. In this first series, we're going to talk about microphones. And there's so many things to talk about microphones, we're going to have to split this up into perhaps half a dozen videos. But first thing I'd like to say about microphones, until you understand how to deploy mics and the proper ones to use, you cannot call yourself a sound guy. You just cannot be. It all starts with the microphone. So let's break it down into a couple of different categories. We are going to be going over eventually microphone technology in terms of dynamics or condensers, polar response patterns, and frequency response. But for today, we're just going to talk about the two main types of microphones just to kind of help you get started. We're going to talk about dynamic microphones and condenser microphones. Now, down on the table in front of me, I have a whole variety of microphones. By the time we're done this series, we will probably have gone through perhaps 100 different types of mics. We're going to divvy this up into the dynamics and the condensers. So the first thing, let's talk about dynamic mics. A dynamic microphone looks like nothing more than a little diaphragm, a winding of wire, and a magnet. And in fact, that's all they are. They look like a baby speaker, and speakers can be used as microphones in some cases. Dynamic microphones, as you can see, have very few moving parts, no real electronics involved, which makes them very rugged. So you can quite literally hammer a nail in with a dynamic microphone and put it back on the stand and use it. I don't recommend it, but I've seen it done. And as you also can see in the diagram, they make their own electricity. So you don't need any external power source. That is, no batteries are required to use them. You don't need phantom power. But the downside of a dynamic microphone is that it just does not have very high frequency response. Once you get above 10,000 hertz or 10K, they pretty much run out of steam. So you do not want to use these on an instrument that has high frequencies that you would like to capture. So they are not your best choice for things like cymbals or violins or maybe even female vocals. Where they do shine is in applications that need a lot of extra bass. So we really like dynamic microphones for things like kick drums and toms. They also work well on instruments that have extra highs that we don't want. For instance, electric guitars are really done well with dynamic microphones because there's a bunch of extra high frequency garbage produced by amplifiers and distortions that we do not want to capture. And of course, we can use them on standard vocals, male vocals, all kinds of other things. We will, later in the series, we will review the hundreds of different ways that you can use dynamic microphones. Condenser microphones are a completely different technology. If you look at the diagram, you'll see it looks like a tiny little drum head, perhaps anywhere from 1/4 of an inch to an inch across, a gap, and a little preamp circuit. And what happens is the little surface, that little diaphragm, is metallized and charged up to somewhere around 48 volts in many cases. And as the sound enters the front of the microphone and wiggles the little diaphragm, it changes the gap, and the gap acts like a condenser or capacitor. So this really, we used to call them, in fact, capacitor microphones. They go into their own preamplifier and out they go. Now, they do require some sort of battery power or phantom power. Most all professional microphones are what we call phantom powered from the board. It needs 48 volts DC to operate, coming up the same cable. Advantages of condenser microphones: extremely high frequency response. Many of them will go to 50,000 hertz or even 100,000 hertz. So there's no limit to the upper end of them. So they are really great on things like cymbals, acoustic guitars, violins, female vocals, many times male vocals that you want to capture those extra highs. However, they do not do very well many times with lots of low frequency information and can be bottomed out. So for instance, condenser microphones are probably not your best choice for things like kick drums and toms. Way other choices out there. So use dynamics for low frequency instruments and use condensers for high frequency instruments. Okay, this is Mike Sokol, and I hope you enjoyed this series. Stay tuned for more live sound advice videos.